Getting started with Peplink's cellular and SpeedFusion technology may seem a bit daunting at first, especially with all the different options they give you. But don't worry, we're going to break it all down step by step. We're going to go through the best practices to ensure a rock-solid, unbreakable connection. So whether you're setting up a remote location or a failover for your business, we got you covered. Let's dive in and get you connected. Here I have the MaxBR2, a dual 5G modem router that also accepts 2 additional hardwired WANs. If you're interested in picking one of these up, make sure you reach out to us here at Crosstalk Solutions, as we're now Peplink Gold partners. It's super easy to get started. You just simply remove this little SIM card tray on the back, pop your SIM card in, and then go ahead and get it powered on. Now we want to get connected to this, so you can either just plug right into an Ethernet port or connect to the Wi-Fi that's printed on the back of every single Peplink device. I'll go ahead and get connected up myself and we'll dive into the configuration. I'm all connected up with Wi-Fi and I pulled up the configuration page, which is 192.168.50.1. This is the same across the board for all Peplink devices. We'll get logged in here. The default credentials are always admin. The first thing it's going to have us do is change the admin credentials as well as the default SSID. I'll get these changed here and then we'll get back into it and take a look at the WAN connections. Here at the dashboard, we can see all of the basic WAN configurations. I want to point out here that everything is rated by priority, and you can move every one of these up and down super easy. You can do this on the fly. It works very quickly. But here we have the first 2 WAN connections, WAN 1 and WAN 2. These are the hardwired WAN ports. If things are put into the same priority, they do a type of load balancing, which you can configure deeper in the settings. I'll point that out later. But down below, we can see the other priorities, Cellular 1 and Cellular 2. There are 2 individual modems on board this device, so we can configure them up. Down below, there's also some disabled WANs, so if you want to do Wi-Fi as WAN, which is such a cool feature, or VLAN WAN for something like router on a stick, or maybe your provider just gives you your ISP connection on a VLAN, you can configure those up. Let's take a look at my setting here, which is for cellular. Peplink is known for their cellular connections, so you can bet there's going to be a lot of settings in here. But don't worry, most of these you really don't have to do much with, but let me give you the tour. The first few things to note about your cellular connection here is the type of priority it's at, as well as what type of standby state it's in. So because this is not dragged up into priority 1 just yet, it is showing it as a priority 2 or a backup connection. Now down below, if you do have your cellular settings in a backup connection state, you may want to modify how it is in standby. So if you want your cellular connection to be always ready, kind of the hot standby, you want it to be in remain connected. If it's disconnected whenever it's in a standby state, that means it will take a few minutes to associate with the tower, get its IP address, and get you online. This is really nice if you're on a limited cellular plan. It doesn't use any cellular connectivity while it's in the disconnected standby state. I want to leave mine connected. Something that was a little bit confusing at first was the SIM card selection. You look at this router and it says it's a dual cellular router, and it is. But every single modem inside of it has 2 SIM slots, so a total of 4 SIM cards can be present. At any given time, only 2 of those can be used at once. One of the reasons why you may want to take advantage of having 4 SIM cards available is maybe you're going across the country and your primary carriers may not have connectivity anywhere. So you can put some smarts into this, so if SIM card A in modem 1 doesn't have service, switch to SIM card B, or if you had a metered plan, you could have it automatically switch to SIM card B in cellular SIM 1. Down below, you can actually pick what type of cellular technology you want to use here. Most of the time you want to leave this auto, but maybe you have a location that has better LTE than 5G, and you may think, that's weird, why would that be the case? Well, maybe you have an LTE tower that's really close by and gives you a really good service, but you're just on the edge of a 5G tower, so you'd rather say, hey, connect to LTE, it's much more stable for me. As I said, I like the auto feature here, but I wanted to point this out. You can even go more in depth with this and select custom bands. Look at all these. This is a list of bands that my unit accepts. If you're in a mobile application, you probably want to leave these all checked because you don't know what bands are going to be around you. But say you have a remote office and you know for a fact a certain band is better than another, because you can do some experimenting here. You could select just one band, do some speed tests, go to the next band, do another speed test. This allows you to really hone in on what's best for you. I'm going to leave all bands because this is my unit that I take on the road for me. So I'm going to set it back to auto. And the one place I always look first when a customer is having a cell connection issue is the APN. Now, anytime you connect to a tower, you have to have an APN. Think of this as the access point name. It's not a one-for-one of an SSID, but you could kind of think of it like that. Now, this should automatically populate whenever you put your SIM in. And if this doesn't automatically populate, you're going to have to call your carrier. This changes from carrier to carrier. And not only that, from plan to plan, this can change. Now, there are some big ones that you can look up online and try, but if it's not automatically populating, probably want to give their 800 number a call. The last thing I'm going to point out here on this page is actually the health check settings. Now, this is available for every single type of WAN, not just cellular, but this is how the Peplink decides, is this a good usable connection? Smart Check is best for LTE type connections. There are some other ones here of plain old ping, DNS lookup, HTTP. Basically, it's doing a request, and if it gets the information back in a timely manner, it's going to say, hey, it's good enough for us, we're going to use it. Now, because my SIM card populated just how it should, I'm not going to apply these settings. I like it how it is. Now that I did a once-over of this connection, I want it to be a priority 1 because honestly, that's mostly what this router is going to be for me, is a cellular router. I want to point out inside the WAN, there are a lot of the same settings, but this is pretty much just like any other WAN connection. Is it a DHCP connection? Is it a static connection? Do we need to set DNS information? All of that is very similar. And by the way, if you ever get caught up with something and it just doesn't make sense, make sure you use these little help icons. They're surprisingly insightful. I'll go ahead and cancel out of here and let's set up a quick Wi-Fi as WAN. This is probably one of my favorite options with Peplink. Think of it this way. If you have a Wi-Fi connection, maybe you rolled into an RV park and they have surprisingly good Wi-Fi, and you want to take that into your Peplink as a WAN connection and then broadcast it to all of your local devices, you can. Let's go ahead and drag this up as a priority 2 so it actually turns on and not disabled. Here's my local Wi-Fi homestead. I'll get us connected. Click connect. Close. And now we can see here that it pulled an IP address from my local router and it's in standby mode. If we want to have it do some load balancing, we'll just drag it up into priority 1. Now that we got the basics of the WAN setup, let's actually take a look at the LAN configuration. So under the network tab here, we see the basic untagged network that everybo's on, the 192.168.50.1/24. Let's say, for example, we want to have a guest network, so later we can make an outbound policy that maybe forces guests to a different WAN. Let's go ahead and create a new LAN. We'll call it guest, and we'll give it VLAN 10. Okay, so now we have a guest network set up. It's not isolated or anything just yet. Let's go ahead and apply, and we'll go ahead and set up an SSID for it. Let's go over to AP. And under AP is actually where you see all of your SSID settings. You can modify the one we already have, but let's go ahead and create a new one. We'll call it guest network. We'll make it always on and we'll switch it to guest 10. Okay, so we got the guest SSID all set up. Let's go ahead and modify the outbound policy. This is probably the setting I change most inside of the advanced tab. Under the advanced tab, you'll see a lot of options here from IPsec, OpenVPN, firewall information, but the things I touch most are generally the outbound policy and the firewall rules. First, let's modify the outbound policy. So you see here, this is read just like a firewall rule set, top down. The first thing is the HTTPS persistence. What this means is if you go to load a web page, it's going to use the same connection to keep that web page alive. The reason you want this, well, one of the reasons you want this is for secure websites. Think of your bank. If you log into your bank and the bank sees you coming from multiple public IPs, it's going to lock you out. That's a security risk. So we do want that to be there. Down below we have the default, which is set to auto. Basically, it's going to defer to what the priorities are on the dashboard. We want to make an exception to this that lives right under the HTTPS persistence. Let's go ahead and create one. We're going to name this the guest rule. Here we want to specify the source. Let's go ahead and do an IP network. So we'll specify the guest subnet at 192.168.10.0 and destination we'll leave any. Next, we have to select the algorithm. So this is actually deciding, well, what do we want to do with the WAN connections? Well, here, the first one is weighted balance. This means it's going to spread it out over the different WANs. You can change the weight of these by moving these left and right. That's not very helpful for us. What I actually want to do is use the enforced. So this is basically selecting one WAN connection. I want them, in my example, to use Wi-Fi as WAN. I don't want them using my precious cellular data. I want guests to use this, and if it's not available, That's too bad. They're just a guest network. They're going to have to live without the internet. There are other options here. We could use priority, and this is very similar to enforce, but it gives it other options. Say, for example, we wanted to give them Wi-Fi as WAN, but with a backup to make these cellular too. What we'd do is we'd put Wi-Fi as WAN on top and our other connection below, which basically means if Wi-Fi as WAN is not available, it will fall through to the next. But if that's not available also, you're out of luck. And finally, one of my favorites here is actually lowest used. So lowest used looks at all of the WANs and it will select the one that's being utilized the least. Now this would be great if you have maybe a server on your network that just downloads videos and you're not really that worried about it. You just don't want it clogging up one of your other connections. You would just specify that server in the source and then it will just use the least used connection. But let's go back to the guest example here and select enforced. So I want it to be Wi-Fi as WAN on 2.4 and we'll click save. And I do want this to be just below the HTTPS persistence and we'll click confirm. Now that we have the outbound policy set up for our guests, let's go ahead and make a quick access rule to make sure they're not going to be able to peer over into our secure network. We're here under firewall access rules. Let's go ahead and add an internal firewall connection. So we will label this isolate guest. And there's a few ways you could do this. I'm going to keep it super simple because we only have 2 subnets here. I'm going to use any protocol and the source will be IP network and the destination will be an IP network. And we'll change this to deny. So what this is saying is, hey, anything that comes from 192.168.10.anything to 192.168.50.anything, we're going to go ahead and deny that. We're not going to let that pass. We can enable logging too, so we can see in the logs if anybody's trying to access something. We'll go ahead and apply. And now we have our guest LAN connection all set up. One of the things I want to show you here is the SpeedFusion technology. Now this is one of Peplink's claim to fame. You know how failover works. We know load balance is essentially taking a weighted percentage and sending some traffic out WAN 1 and some traffic out WAN 2. SpeedFusion is a bonding technology. If you remember DSL bonded, it's kind of similar to that, where if you have 2 WAN connections, it uses them both at the same time. This does a few things. Number one, if you were to run a speed test, you would see that the speed you're seeing is the connections added together, not just one or the other. And number two, it does add resiliency to your connections. If you have more than one connections going out a SpeedFusion tunnel, you can configure it to send extra packets out each one so that they're duplicates. So if one happens to go offline, you're still connected. And you may be asking, well, how does that really work? Well, the trick to this is there has to be a Peplink device somewhere out in the cloud for your device to build a connection out every single WAN and terminate somewhere. Because there's now a Peplink on both sides, it can actually use its algorithm to make that bonding happen. I'm going to show you here the SpeedFusion Cloud option, which is by far the easiest, which basically you're paying monthly or yearly for Peplink to host that other end for you. There are other ways to do this. You could just get another Peplink device that you put somewhere else and you build the connection there, or you use something called a SpeedFusion Hub. This is a virtual ISO that you can take and install in maybe DigitalOcean, Vultr, AWS, and build it out there. Now, of course, you're going to be paying a subscription at AWS or Vultr to host that, but hey, that may be a better option for you. This is by far the easiest, and let me show you how you set that up. We're going to go ahead and click on Client Mode, and we're going to have to select a SpeedFusion Cloud location. You can go through here and pick the one closest to you. Because I'm taking this thing on the road across the US, I want it to automatically pick. So we'll go ahead and hit the check mark here. We'll click Apply. And just like that, we have a SpeedFusion Cloud set up here, ready to use. If you go back to the dashboard, you can see that it does have the little established connection. It also shows me the data allowance for my plan. If we head back here to the SpeedFusion Connect panel, we get to decide how it's going to be used. Because you may be paying monthly for this type of data, you may want to say, hey, just my work PC can use this. Other than that, we want to use all of the other rules we have in place using the outbound policy. You can see here the options we have are by application. Maybe we just specify Zoom traffic. We can route by SSID, so anybody connected to a specific SSID gets access to this, or maybe just by a LAN client. I think this is probably the most popular option, so let's go ahead and route by LAN client. And we can see my PC right here, and we'll click Save and Apply. And now my PC will be the only device allowed to use that SpeedFusion connection. So let's go ahead and run over the speed test and we'll see, yep, it looks like we're coming from a location called UpCloud USA. I'm normally connected to Xfinity, so let's go ahead and run a speed test. Now, it's not shocking to me that I'm only getting this speed. Think of it this way. Inside my house doesn't have the best cellular connectivity, and also it's using Wi-Fi as WAN on 2.4. So normally whenever I connect Wi-Fi as WAN on 2.4 here, I only get about 50 because of my setup inside. With the LAN configured and the WAN configured, there's just a few more places I want to point out here that you should take a look at whenever you get your Peplink all set up. The first place is actually the status tab. This is where you can get some good information about your clients and how much data they're using. And next is the system tab. The system tab is where you'll see all of the information about the admin login credentials. You'll be able to update the firmware, which you should do right away. Mine's already up to date. And then of course you can configure the InControl information. InControl is basically the cloud service that allows you to manage these things remotely. Every single Peplink device that I'm aware of comes with this for free for a year. Now this is a recurring subscription. You don't absolutely need it, but it is really nice to be able to remotely control your devices. Automatically, whenever you get your box with your Peplink, if you turn it over and grab the serial and go to incontrol2.peplink.com, you can just adopt it right in and it will come up online as soon as it has an internet connection. We'll go there next and I'll give you the rundown on InControl 2. You'll need to make an account at incontrol2.peplink.com. It will have you set up an organization at first, just follow through its steps. And the big thing you need to know is you have to go to Organization Settings and click Add Devices. This is where you'll put the serial number of your Peplink and click Next and go ahead and give it a name. I already have mine all configured up, but this will allow it to populate inside your organization. And if we go back to the InControl 2 button, we'll see the Peplink testing group. We'll go ahead and click into there and then click on my BR2 Pro. And I want to point out, InControl 2 has a lot of functions. Number one, it gives you a high-level view of all the information about your device. You can see that here. You can see the LAN and the WAN information. You can even click down into the details about this and get some more info about every one of these pieces. Number two, it allows you to pre-configure options for a device before it even comes online, primarily the Wi-Fi SSID as well as SpeedFusion. Maybe you have this device new in box and you're shipping it out to a client, and whenever they turn it on, you want it to automatically connect to the internet and pull this config. We can do that here, and as long as we put that serial number in, it will reach out and get that information. Number three, it's super useful for remote management. If we go here and click on Settings and click Remote Web Admin Dashboard, it's going to build a connection to that device back there behind me, no matter how it's connected to the internet. As long as it has an internet connection, we'll be able to get into its local web interface and start making changes. And you can see that right here. I'm not connected to the local IP address of that box to get this screen. It's going through InControl to get that information. Now, the final thing about InControl I like to point out is actually a service called InTouch. InTouch is a really cool service. Think of it this way. Most of the time when you're using something like a Peplink, your WAN is not a traditional WAN connection. Now, it could be, but oftentimes we're using something like LTE or Starlink that's double natted or using carrier grade NAT. So inbound connections, like an inbound connection to a web server, it won't work. Now with a traditional WAN, you could use something like port forwarding, and that is definitely a security discussion to have because you really don't want to do that most of the time. But let's say we had a server that sat behind our Peplink that we want to be able to control as an administrator. If you're familiar with something like a Cloudflare tunnel, it's very similar to that, but let me show you how we set it up. If we go to Settings and go to InTouch, we can go ahead and configure up a client. Now there's two types of client for my specific device. Serial versus IP. Because there's actually a serial modem built into this, I could run a serial cable from the Peplink to maybe my router, and now I have a serial connection completely using out-of-band management. Even if my core router dies, as long as my Peplink is up, I can get a serial connection into it. With mine here, I went ahead and connected up my Zima board so we have something to dial into. So let's go ahead and add its information. We'll go ahead and give it a name. Zima board, we'll put in its local IP address. Right now it's sitting at 50.64. I found that in the clients page of my Peplink. Because InControl 2 allows you to create different user groups for administration, we can go ahead and select who inside our organization can see this. I'll go ahead and give it to everybody. It's just Chris and I. We'll go ahead and click OK and save. And now whenever we want to dial into the Zima board from InControl, we just click this little play button. It will open up a new tab here. In just a second, we'll have access to my Casa OS web interface. And look at that, it wants me to go ahead and set it up. That's actually a brand new Zima board, which I'm going to set up here in just a few minutes. But look at that, we have a connection through InControl 2 to a web server inside of here. You can do other things like SSH, but the web service one's probably the most beneficial. And that about wraps it up. That is everything I do whenever I get a new Peplink device or I'm helping a client set it up. Of course, there's a lot of advanced options we can dive into. If you'd like to pick up one of these units or you need some help with some of the more advanced features inside of Peplink, make sure you reach out to us. We'd be happy to help. As I said, we're now gold partners with Peplink. Thanks for watching and subscribing to Crosstalk Solutions.